we are. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us as you're coming on. We appreciate you being here. Or if you're watching the replay, we appreciate that too. I'm Stephanie Weaver, and I'm here with Domenica Ruta, who is walking down the street in New York City, which is the coolest place to be broadcasting live from ever. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. I hopped off the subway to do this and I'm glad it's working out. And it's beautiful
Yeah,
weather. So it's a great day to
looks
be
like
outside.
a beautiful day in New York.
Yeah.
So, as you're joining us, you can feel free to drop questions in the comments and I'll try to catch them as they go by. But Domenic and I are going to talk a little bit about family estrangement, difficult mothers, how you write an obituary for someone you've been estranged from, all kinds of fun stuff. So, we hope that you stick with us for the ride here. So I was first introduced to your work, Domenica, through your memoir, With or Without You, that came out in 2013, which seems like forever ago.
Yeah.
I probably read it about 2018 and was absolutely just blown away. So why don't you just give us like a capsule description of kind of what happened in your memoir and what it covered?
Yeah, my memoir is about growing up with as my mother, who was a single mother for the first like 6 years of my life. And she was never diagnosed, but strongly suspects she was bipolar. She had bipolar disorder. She was deeply, deeply, deeply sickly, narcissistic, personality disorder. And she was a heroin addict. And she could be really funny. She could be really cruel. She could be really supportive. She could be really destructive. And it's just my story, our story of just growing up together, because she felt like a child in many ways, and what that was like for me. And then eventually growing up and growing away from her and having to cut ties with her to save my own life.
Right. And so, what were some of the things that you heard from readers since your book's been out for a long time about your mother? And has that changed at all in the decade or so since the book's been out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So thanks for asking it. People really like her, which makes me feel good as a writer because she was very charismatic and funny and or could be. And that's always a nice thing to hear is, people who didn't have to suffer her abuse can find her charming. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's sort of the point. That she wasn't your mom, so you can be funny. And I think all the time when I love horrible mothers in fiction, TV shows and movies and books. I just think they're so delightful and funny and interesting. And because they're not my mother. And so that's a response a lot of people have that I think is really cool. Um, uh, so it's mostly positive. People who really know me well and who love me find it, like Mike, for example, my husband, who never met her in real life. He found it really much more disturbing and sad. But he was coming at it from a very different angle. Like, the book had already been out for a long time. He didn't, yeah, he was reading it in the context of being my partner, and never having met her in real life. So that was
Right.
his reaction. And being close to me and seeing the effects of what it was like to live like that were. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. My husband doesn't normally read my books. It's just not his jam, which is totally fine. But he wanted to read the memoir Bittersweet, and
yeah.
he was
And he's in
he
it.
was he's in it, yeah, and he
Yeah.
was really sad. Like it made him
Yeah.
really sad
Yeah.
because he was like, I knew you went through all this stuff, but to read it and feel like I was kind of in your head and
Yeah.
understand what kind of more what it felt like. And he's like, and I'm also really mad at them again. you know,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I understand. People who love us, they don't want us to be mistreated. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you is you just wrote a piece on Substack called "An
Hmm.
Annotated Obituary for My Mother," and one of the lines that stood out for me was, "It took me 4 months, or it took me 4 decades, or it took me one day to write it."
Hmm. Yeah.
Tell me about that a little bit, and then I'll talk about my obituary story.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear your story. So I had been writing my mom's obituary since I was a little kid because I had been afraid she was going to die since I was a little kid. My earliest memory of childhood is waking up in this like basement apartment we used to live in, and waking up in the night and standing and going leaving my bed and standing by her bed and watching her breathe to make sure she was breathing, and watching her eyes move under her eyelids because she was in REM sleep, and I didn't understand it and I thought it was terrifying. Um, and then just constantly checking on her in the night to make sure she was alive because it was my biggest fear. And so that never really went away. And then, at a certain point in my teen years and my 20s, I was like, I was like, can you just die and end this misery for everybody around you, not just me? And which sounds so harsh, and if you haven't read the book or if you haven't known somebody who's a deeply narcissistic heroin addict, it just sort of feels like someone should euthanize you to put everyone out of their misery, including you. And so for a long time, I was sort of writing this obituary in my head, like what I would say about her, how I would art direct her funeral. There was a lot of like, sometimes there's a lot of grandiosity on my part in these, as I imagine these things. And then sometimes it was like a much more practical task. Like, what would I actually say? Like, would I tell the truth? I mean, how could I talk about this person? And then after I became estranged from her when I was probably about 26, I continued to think about it and think about it and think about like what would I say about her. But it would have been something I had been thinking about. It was always in the back of my mind for years and years and years. And then when she finally died this past January, I kind of froze. I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything. And then I snapped into action and I handled the basic logistics of, having her cremated and having her room cleaned out where she had been living. And gathering, there was really nothing to save, but if there's anything to save, just trying to do an inventory of what was worth saving, and things like that. And I did all of that. And then I remember coming home, I did that by myself, and then coming back to New York City. My family, she lived in Massachusetts. That's where I'm from. Uh, Came back to New York City and thinking, okay, I should write an obituary. And I couldn't do it. And I was just frozen. And every day that went by, I felt this looming anxiety and pressure and an unexpressed grief, of just like what's wrong with me? She deserves an obituary. People should know that she died. People in her life should know. The people in her life should know she died. This should be information people have. This should be searchable. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. And then one day, I had a great therapy session, and it's going to sound really cheesy, but I started doing this thing. I started dancing alone in my room, with the shades shut, and just because it was just so clear, from the therapy I'm doing, that like it was not something my mind could figure out. It was something my body needed to process.
Mm.
And I just started dancing a little bit in my room to these specific songs to sort of just, I don't know, have a little spiritual exorcism, have a little emotional exorcism. I don't know. And one time I did that, I felt all this like soot coming off of my body, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then the next day, I just sat down and I wrote the whole thing from beginning to end. Uh, and It was funny because one of my kids was homesick from school, and I was like, okay, make sure he's okay, go back to writing, and just kept going back and forth. And it took me a couple of hours, but, sort of did it in one sitting. And,
Wow.
and it all just came all at once, with like very little editing.
Yeah.
And so that's why, so in many ways it happened really quickly, but also it happened really slowly, and I've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah. I think as writers that need to put it into words in a very specific way is different
Hmm.
for like a non-writer person whose parent dies. Like somebody's got to put the facts down and get it into the paper. Um, so my mom was dying very slowly. It was the end of
Mm.
her life. And so I was there for 8 days. And so we were taking care of stuff like arranging the cremation and then somebody was like, "Oh, or, we should write an obituary. Oh, you're the writer.
Right.
You write it." So
Yeah.
I'm, on my
Woo.
iPad trying to figure out kind of what to say. And obviously, I'm not going to talk about all the hard, real stuff. It was
Yeah.
like, let's make her sound good. And one of the lines in it, because I did look it up, was she began knitting sweaters for disadvantaged children in Cleveland. And there's a whole story in my book about her
Yeah.
making a sweater that didn't turn out to be for me. So I was able to put like sort of little Easter eggs in there for myself, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I kind of knew what that meant, and maybe
Right.
people that knew my story knew what that meant. And so anyway, I write the thing and I contact the paper and then they come back and they say, "Okay, it's going to be $650." And I was like, "Holy shit." And
Yeah.
I reached out to my siblings and cuz you wrote about that, like this is how these
Yes.
papers
It was
kind of make
$750. And I was like,
keep
what?
keep going, right? Is that they
Yeah.
charge all this money per word for
Yeah.
obituaries. And so then my siblings were like, my mother was unbelievably frugal, like cheap or
Yes.
whatever word you want to call it, partly, I
Yes.
think, from her trauma and partly from growing up during the Depression. And so we all were like, well, she would just spin over in her cremated urn if she knew that we were going to spend
Right.
this much on her obituary. Like, we can't possibly do that. So
Yeah.
then I was like joking. My husband and I were like, well, how about just her name and the dates and very frugal as the obituary? And we thought that was hilarious, and my siblings
Yeah.
were not amused. So then my
Yeah.
sister took over and wrote just a very short thing, and so then I posted
Yeah.
mine on Facebook because I was like, well, I put all
Yeah.
this work into it. I want somebody to
Right.
read it and kind of
Yeah.
see what I thought about her. But I hadn't planned on writing a memoir. It wasn't until I came home with her recipe box that I ended up
Right.
trying to work through my relationship with her because my mom wasn't overtly abusive like your mom was,
Right.
and my mom wasn't overtly difficult in the way your mom was, and she
Mhm.
wasn't dangerous in the way your mom was. So
Mhm.
it took me a long time to kind of figure out why was it so hard for me to forgive her,
Yeah.
and what what was all that about, and so working through kind of the recipes and the memories was how I got to it. But I felt like I related so much to the different pieces that you've written. You also have a piece in this new anthology, No Contact,
Mhm.
that's beautiful. 33 writers write about estrangement. So if you're interested in estrangement, which you probably are if you're watching this, it's great to read an in-depth book like Domenica's or mine, but it's also kind of great to read all these short pieces, very different points of
Mhm.
view, different experiences, different writing styles. And so it's a wonderful addition to the literature around estrangement because there's not a lot of it. Um,
Mhm.
so yours was called You Don't Have to Be Good. And, what struck me about it was this notion of like going back to a dry well and expecting there to be water, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about, kind of your relationship with your dad and how he responded when you told him that you had cancer?
Yeah, yeah. It was, as I say in that essay, I had already lost my mom. She was alive, but I was estranged from her, and it was such a unbelievably painful hole in my heart that I chose, but it didn't make it any less painful that I chose it. And I lived with it every day, and every day I wondered, am I crazy? Am I a horrible person? Is this the wrong, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? And it was so, so painful. And so I really was willing to go to the ends of the earth to not do that with anybody else in my life. And my dad was really, really, really difficult, and violent, and but not ever violent towards me physically, but like he was really violent to other people in our home, and I witnessed that, and that was really hard and scary. And he it was a really, really hard relationship, but I already had lost a parent, and so I felt like it was my job to rise above and meet him halfway, meet him more than halfway, and really uh, do what I could to rescue that relationship with lot, and just if I just have really good boundaries, everything will be okay. And really what that meant is if I just don't ever need anything from him ever, everything will be okay. And that's the way it had always been in my relationship with him. And I was really good at that. And then I got cancer, and it was really scary. It was absolutely terrifying. And his response was to minimize it, which is what he always did with any time I had any kind of pain in my life. And it was the last straw. It was like, okay, it was painful when you minimized my pain when I was a little kid and I had like strep throat, which wasn't fatal. It was painful when you minimized my pain when I had like a broken ankle. You know what I mean? And like that was painful, but it wasn't that big a deal. And it was painful when you minimized my emotional pain, but I could be like, but you're a boomer, and you don't understand emotional pain, and you're not illiterate, and you're not literate in these ways. And but when I presented him with the diagnosis of cancer, and that cancer was, I was going to need uh 16 rounds of ACT chemo, which anyone who's keeping score knows, like that's the bad stuff. That's the really, really strong stuff. I was going to need 30 rounds of radiation. I had multiple surgeries, all of these things. And his second wife had been through cancer before he had ever met her. So he had this, like, he knew how hard it was and how painful and challenging it could be because he was married to somebody who'd been through it. He didn't experience that with her, but he was really sort of believing and responsive to her situation. And when he did that again, I was like, oh, it's not even about cancer. You just can't respond to the pain of other people in this fundamental way. And I need you to. And it coincided with my sister's wedding. And, this was all in 2021 when COVID was still a big deal. Like I remember in 2021, my children, my kid, my first grader at the time, was in school. We were so happy that he was in school, but he was still wearing a mask in school. Everybody I knew in New York City was still wearing masks. Everyone was masked on the subway. Everybody was masked in public in the grocery stores. We were still masking. It was not like, cool, it's gone, it's over.
Right.
And my sister was having a wedding, and she wasn't willing to take precautions to protect me, her sister who had cancer, for her wedding. And my dad didn't want me. And my dad sort of made that seem like that was all my fault and my choice. And it triggered this pain of, oh, you didn't protect me then, and you can't protect me now. You couldn't validate my pain then, you can't now. And it just felt like too much. And so I wrote this essay about feeling the need to just always feeling like I'm a bad person for having needs, and trying to contort myself into a person who didn't have any needs at all, and maybe that would prove that I'm a good person. And then even then, I couldn't get what I like, these sort of really basic things that I needed. And even in writing that and in editing it with the editor Jenny Bartoy, who's brilliant and beautiful, an amazing writer, an amazing editor, you know, uh, like writing into all of these moments and in that essay, and her saying like, you don't need this, you can cut this. And I was like, no, but I'm afraid people won't believe me. Or I'm afraid people will think I'm exaggerating, or I'm afraid I was sort of reenacting with her. I'm afraid people are going to think I'm being dramatic. And she was like, no, I believe you. I get this. This makes so much sense to me. This is going to make sense to our readers. Our readers are not people we're trying to convince that
Right.
things can get this bad. Our readers are people who know things can get this bad.
Yeah.
And so I had this like really beautiful experience working with her, being believed by her, being seen by her, being validated by her as an editor. Um, that was really beautiful and healing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I got married in my book and in real life,
Yeah.
and my parents and my younger brother, who I was estranged from, were not invited. And so again, it was another thing why I wanted to talk with you, because I was like, those family occasions that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if we get cut out of our families or we choose to
Right.
exit from our families, we're missing those and we're not
Mm-hmm.
part of those. And regardless of whether or not it's a fun time, like
Right.
a good wedding or where you'd really enjoy it, you still feel that loss of not being part of it.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and
Yeah.
absolutely say, like, I could relate to all of the things, like just like not picking you up at the airport or what of that, like I used to have that whole thing where they would be like, well, you can take the shuttle, or someone would
Right.
come get me and then it would be like an empty van with grease in it and they'd throw my luggage in there and
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
I think I would have preferred to take the shuttle if I'd known this was going to be the option, but they were
Right.
being nice by picking me up, or I had, my younger
Right.
brother took me to the airport for the kind of the last time and used that opportunity of 45 minutes to harangue me about
Yeah.
my experience. And so anyway, it's just there's so many ways that these things echo through our lives in these estrangement stories.
Hmm.
And what do you so what do you tell people if they ask you, do people ask you about your estrangement or do they understand, or what
It
kinds of
it
responses have you gotten?
it really, so it's funny. I got good at having lots of different answers, and what's, for better or for worse, we still live in a very repressed culture where most people like, ooh, they don't want to touch it.
Right, right.
And I remember going on a date once, and this guy kept asking, like, I was a sort of like, I don't know why he kept asking about my mom, or he was asking about my life, which, great. And finally, like, and I just kept trying to avoid it. And finally, I just blurted, was like, well, I don't talk to my mom because she's a heroin addict. And he was like, oh. And then we didn't go on another date. And then I was like, okay, so I need to have a better answer than that. And so I would just say, it's funny, I didn't even have the vocabulary of estrangement for so long. It wasn't really until
Right.
uh, Jenny Bartoy, the editor of No Contact, approached me that I sort of like, oh, right, that word, that applies to me, that applies to my situation. And so I would just say, I often spoke about my mother in the past tense. I always spoke about her in the past tense, even before she died. And so I think people assumed that she was dead and just didn't ask. Because again, people are repressed and they don't want to, and people are polite. And I think,
Right.
and sometimes people are both. And so I could get around it that way. And then sometimes, and it just, it's just such a thorny conversation. And I got good at sort of reading, like, okay, who are you? What is your vibe? What do I know about you? How much can I tell you? And so I would just sort of say, yeah, I don't talk, I haven't talked to my mother in this many years. And that usually, and that usually ended the conversation. I haven't talked to my mother in 5 years. I've talked to my mother in 10 years. I haven't talked to my mother in 16 years. That usually, it stopped there. And if anyone wanted to know more, I already felt safe in that fact that they wanted to know more, that they were willing to know more, that showed me that there was a part of them that was willing to show up for the complexity of it. And so I could get into more detail of, she's mentally ill, she's abusive, she's a drug addict, and it's really painful. And but I had to stop. I had to change my phone number and cut contact with her. And almost always people were like, right on. Yeah, I get it. If they were willing to get to even that point in the conversation. But the vast majority of people didn't want to know.
Yeah.
And I understand that too. It's hard to talk about.
Yeah, and the thing that's shocking, that so there's a study that Cornell did. Carl Pillimer was the lead researcher, and he put all the data into a book called Fault Lines. And it's about one in
Mhm.
four Americans are
That's a
estranged from a
lot of
family member.
people.
That's like, yeah, a lot,
So many people.
69 million ish.
Right.
So the fact that we only recently have developed language for it, I think social media has amplified it. It's not that
Hmm.
it wasn't happening before, but like when I was going through this, there was no language for it. I
Right.
was ashamed of it. This
Yeah.
was in the early 90s into the
Right.
2000s. So, no contact wasn't a term, like, there's
Yeah.
no internet. So,
Right.
estrangement wasn't even really a term that
Yeah.
I would have even thought to use. And so I do think it's very helpful for people to have the language around it and
Hmm.
understand that it's not something, your family's not the only one. And there's lots of
Yes.
different reasons. I think yours is a more maybe extreme case, but for me, it was like I just couldn't pretend that I hadn't been abused as a kid, and that's what
Right.
they wanted me to do, and so
Right.
I
Right.
just was like, "No," and
Yeah.
I I
Yeah.
I didn't know, like, the book my book starts with me saying
Right.
goodbye to my dad at the airport,
Right.
and I had
Right.
no idea I wouldn't really talk to him for 16 years, and if I
Yeah.
had known, I don't know what I would have done with that information,
Right.
but I just was trying to figure out, like, why I was so depressed and,
Right.
what was going on with me and why I was having these nightmares, and so, for anybody who's watching, who's dealing with this, who's questioning themselves, I think part of why these books are important is because it tells people you're not alone, you're not crazy, and Domenica, the fact that your parents couldn't care for you appropriately, I had strep throat as a kid. It was unbelievably painful, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
cared for. Like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's not normal to be like, "Oh, you're being dramatic." It's like, "No,
Yeah.
your child is ill."
It is,
So
thank you.
there
It is really painful. Like
it is
because
really
I'm a
painful.
mom. I have two kids, and even when they're just a little sick, like I go into like loving nurse mode, where I'm just sort of
Right.
like, I'm like clean blankets, clean pillowcases. Like we're gonna suck on an ice cube until you can keep it down. You know what I mean? Like we're just like,
Yeah.
it's like we're gonna make soft lighting. We're gonna watch our favorite shows together. I'm gonna be right here with you. Like I go like, yeah, and so and yeah, anyway, so thank you for validating that. Yeah, and then I just want to say that there's another writer in the anthology No Contact, Emmy Newfield, and she in our at the launch of the book, someone she said something so brilliant and so amazing, and I love it, and I just want to keep shouting it from the rooftops. People who say like estrangement is a trend or it's a new thing that the new generation is doing, you're proof that's not true. You did it at a time when it was really taboo. Uh, she said, no, we just didn't have the technology to stay in such good contact with people that, like, a lot of Americans have an immigrant story, in their, a lot of white or white mixed Americans have an immigrant story and other cultures too, but in their background, and how many of those people just got on those boats and left their country of origin and were like, peace out, I'm never talking to you ever again, and we didn't call it estrangement, we called it immigration.
Right.
And it was just because, like, it was like, well, it's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to get a letter to these people anyway, so it's a good time to just to stop doing that and
Yeah.
march forward and never look back. That this is something that, with populations moving and people migrating, like, it happened all the time. We just didn't call it a conscious choice. We called it getting a new life in a new land,
Right.
and that, so it's actually not this new thing. It's something that people have been doing for a long time. We just didn't have transparency around it because there wasn't this expectation that, like, I can call you whenever I want. I can text you whenever I want. I can track you down on social media. I have all these platforms in which I can connect to your life and see your life happening. We didn't have all those options. And so
Right.
it was easier to just cut off ties and to hide.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to talk a little bit about found family because
Mm,
in your essay, you talk
yeah.
about the 12 step rooms and how
Mhm.
those people really stepped up when you got cancer and all the things that they did for you. And I would say that for sure I had a similar experience. There is an Al-Anon a little chapter in my book because I
Yeah.
had an alcoholic boyfriend prior to the man that I ended up marrying. And that radical acceptance that you receive in those rooms is so striking when you don't have that in your family.
Right.
And you just like you kind of express
It's
disbelief
shameful. It
that
made it
these
made it
yeah,
made it made me feel ashamed, like, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this. You don't need to be nice to me.
right.
Yeah, it felt so foreign, and sometimes, validation can feel almost abrasive when you're so used to being invalidated. It feels so weird. And I remember this in your book. When your parents and your younger brother are denying your story of abuse, and you're going through something I've gone through many, many times for different parts of my life. But wouldn't if I were lying, if I were making all this up, wouldn't that be really disturbing? And wouldn't my therapist have picked up on cues that I was dissociated from reality in this major way. Wouldn't there be other evidence in other parts of my life? Wouldn't these all these therapists I saw think that I had a major personality disorder? Wouldn't that have come up? Wouldn't all these people, and I have experienced that as well with my, like my experiences of abuse, but then with the way I was loved and continue to be loved so much by all of these people in these rooms, it's sort of like, wait, wouldn't, if I were truly this horribly selfish, self-centered, disgusting drama queen, wouldn't these people have some kind of response to me that indicated that? And in fact, it was the exact opposite. It was like they loved me so much and they saw through my armor of invincibility, and they saw through, they're like I had friends who I didn't ask for anything, and I had people
Right.
who were like, we're going to send our housekeeper to come clean your house because it makes us sick in our stomachs to think of you or your husband having to clean your house with
Right.
two kids while you're going through chemotherapy. And like I was like, I didn't ask for that. I didn't, and there's times like, oh my God, I'm being so dramatic and they think I need this. And I was like, they were like, no, we love you. We love you so much that we don't want to think about you having to go through this horrible time. And this makes us feel better because that's how much we love you. And that was so hard for me to integrate for so long because it was so different from what I experienced in
Right.
my family of origin.
Yeah, and it is something that's it is hard to reconcile when you actually are being treated well and like, oh, well, that's, I just remember for some reason, we were kind of talking about like good parenting. Uh, when my friends had a little kid, the baby, and she was giving him a bath and he kind of slipped in the bathtub and she caught him and he was about to cry and she says, "That was really scary. I know that was really
Yeah.
scary, but you're okay." And I had to leave the bathroom because I started crying because I thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
my parents never once validated a single feeling that I had.
Right.
And I was like
Right.
watching good parenting and it really made me choke up like,
Yeah.
oh my God,
Yeah.
like what would that have been like for me to be allowed to be angry or my parent to admit that they'd done something wrong? Like
Yeah.
that just wasn't a thing. The last
Yeah.
thing I wanted to talk about was this generational thing. And I know you've got a
Right.
siren going by, so you might not be able to hear
Sorry
me.
about
No,
that.
no,
New
no,
York
it's okay.
City.
I love New York City.
Yeah. I can hear
So
you great. So you talk
well,
because
that's
I can
good.
hear you.
Yeah. So what I've been thinking about is I have boomer siblings and my younger brother's Gen X and I'm right in that Gen
Yeah.
Jones kind of slice. My parents are silent generation, so my dad
Right.
was a World War II veteran, my mom went through the Depression. And there's a lot on social media now about boomer parents and boomer moms and
Hmm.
how upset they all are with their kids not wanting to talk to them.
Yeah.
And I would say if you're in that category, look to their parents to
Hmm.
get better
Absolutely.
understand.
Absolutely.
Because,
Yeah.
when I understood that my mom was traumatized by her father, my
Hmm.
grandfather, who I never met, and the level of trauma that she had,
Yeah.
then it helped me to understand better why she was so shut down, why she
Right.
couldn't admit this had happened because she would have
Yeah.
had to admit she married a monster and
Yeah.
that was not something she was capable of.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying give people a pass because, for a long time I was like, well, my mom did this and, this and that. My therapist was like, but she had all the resources available to her that you did, right?
Hmm.
She could have gone to therapy. She could have
Hmm.
taken medication. She could have read all the self-help books your dad brought home from his business trips. And I was like, yeah, she could
Yeah.
have, huh? So there's that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying like give people a
Right.
pass, but also to
Right.
just try to get a sense of like anybody coming home from one of those wars was deeply traumatized. And then
Absolutely. Yeah.
nobody talked about anything.
Nothing.
And you had a whole generation of Holocaust survivors that came
Right.
here and didn't talk about anything. And so I think it's somewhat helpful to put it into context and at least see where your story fits into all these other stories. I think has been
Yeah.
helpful for me, especially reading the anthology
Yeah.
and your book as well. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't think we got any questions. I was hoping people would ask us questions. So do you want to say anything else about the anthology or
Yeah, the anthology
Estranged
is
or
is really beautiful. There's
hold it up
so
again?
much a wonderful diversity of voices. You know, I think almost every culture is represented. You know, queer and straight, and you know all different sexualities, and it's just and all different kinds of estrangement. And different narratives, but the beauty and the strength is the universal thread in the anthology of No Contact. So I really love reading it and just being like, oh, this person is, you know what I mean, dealing with family back in Korea, and this person is dealing with family in Ohio, and this person, you know, it's based on religion, and this family they're atheists and they still, you know, and it's sort of like just to see like, oh, this, you know, it happens to so many, it's a reality for so many different people,
Yeah.
and because we can tell ourselves a lot of stories. I know I have of like why this is my fault, why this is my fault, what I did wrong, and what and how can I fix this, how can I be better, and then just reading all of these different people with these different experiences from these different places landing in the same place that I landed in. It was just and writing about it so beautifully. So I highly recommend the anthology No Contact, edited by Jenny Bartoy. And yeah, and if anyone wants to buy my books, there's links on my Substack and Instagram.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, so check both of us out. So Domenica's on Substack as well, and she's a beautiful writer. You can find my book Bittersweet wherever you like to buy books, and I write once a week and usually recommend a movie and a book and a kind of themed piece. So it was great to talk to you. Thank you for sharing a little bit of New York with us because that's so
yeah,
fun.
yeah,
And thank you so much for just your beautiful words and taking the time
yeah.
to talk with me.
All right. Thank you.
Good to see you. Bye.
Bye.